He already knew they were going to die, every single one of them, and the worst part? He couldn't tell anyone why. Kim Dokja had read the novel 3 times. 3 complete read-throughs of 3 Ways to Survive the Apocalypse. Every arc, every death, every betrayal, down to the author's final note in the comment section. He knew the name of every constellation watching from above. He knew which scenarios came next, and he knew, with painful precision, exactly how many people weren't going to make it through the week. But knowing the story and surviving it are 2 completely different things. Chapters 7 and 8 of the Manhwa don't slow down. They don't give you a breath. They pick up in the middle of chaos, the group fractured, the constellation system humming with barely contained hunger, and a new scenario unfolding that tests everything Dokja thought he understood about the novel he memorized. The constellations want spectacle. They always do. These ancient entities, gods, demons, mythological beings from every culture in human history, watch humanity struggle through apocalyptic scenarios the way people watch sports. They bet on survivors. They sponsor favorites. And they are never ever satisfied with easy victories. When the new scenario dropped, Dokja already knew what was coming. He'd read this chapter. He knew who the key player would be, what the trap was, and exactly how the protagonist of the novel, Yoo Jung-yuk, was supposed to handle it. The problem was that Yoo Jung-yuk wasn't handling it alone this time. Dokja had already changed too many variables. The butterfly effect of a reader who knows the plot is a dangerous thing. Lee Hun-sung moved first, the construction worker turned reluctant warrior who had slowly become one of the most reliable people in the group. Dokja had been watching him carefully. Hyun-sung wasn't the type who wanted to be a hero. He was the type who became one anyway because he couldn't stand watching other people suffer. That kind of person was rare, worth protecting. Yu Sanga had already mapped 3 exit routes before anyone else noticed the perimeter had been sealed. That was Sanga, always 2 steps ahead on the logistics while everyone else was still reacting. Dokja appreciated that more than he could say out loud. In a world where the constellations were constantly watching for weakness, having someone who planned like Sanga was worth more than any weapon. But it was Jung Hee-won who changed the shape of the fight entirely. She'd been a lawyer before the apocalypse, methodical, precise, someone who built arguments brick by brick until the entire structure was airtight. That same brain had adapted to combat with terrifying efficiency. When Hee-won moved, she didn't waste anything. Every strike had a purpose. Every retreat created an angle. Watching her fight was like watching someone win an argument with their fists. The scenario's core mechanic was cruel in the way that all the best scenarios were. It looked straightforward until you were already inside it. The monsters weren't the real threat. The real threat was the resource drain, the slow attrition designed to force impossible choices. Dokja knew this. He had read every annotation in the novel about this exact stage. What he hadn't read, what no version of the novel had prepared him for, was what happened when the constellations started taking him seriously. There was a moment in Chapter 7 where Dokja felt it shift, the weight of attention from above, the sense that something vast and ancient had decided he was interesting enough to watch closely. It should have been a good thing. Sponsorship from a powerful constellation meant stat boosts, coins, survival advantages. It meant the system would invest in keeping him alive. Instead, it felt like a target appearing on his back. Because constellations don't sponsor favorites, they collect them. And Dokja had spent enough time studying the novel to understand what that sponsorship actually meant in the long run. It meant he was becoming a character in someone else's story. And characters in someone else's story don't get to choose how their chapter ends. He bought time the only way he knew how, by being useful, by knowing things no one else could know and deploying that knowledge at exactly the right moment. When the scenario's timer began counting down and the rest of the group still hadn't identified the win condition, Dokja did what he always did. He cheated, not by breaking the rules, by knowing which rules actually mattered. The look on Yoo Jung-hyuk's face when it worked was something Dokja had never read in any version of the novel. The novel's protagonist was supposed to be solitary, brutal, someone who survived by sheer overwhelming force and regression cycle experience. He wasn't supposed to look at anyone the way Jung-hyuk looked at Dokja in that moment, like he was trying to solve a problem that kept changing shape. Chapter 8 hit harder. The aftermath of the scenario wasn't relief. It was reckoning. The group had survived, but surviving costs something every single time, and the constellation system had a long memory for debts. New notices appeared in Dokja's status window, things he hadn't seen in the novel, branches of the story that had only opened because of choices he'd made, changes he'd caused just by being present. He started running the calculations in his head. How many deviations had he introduced? How many characters who were supposed to die had he kept alive? How many characters who were supposed to live had he accidentally put in danger by changing the sequence of events? The novel had an ending, a specific, brutal, hard-won ending that Dokja had read 3 times and thought he understood. But the version of the story he was living through now was no longer the novel. It was something new, something the author never wrote. And somewhere above them, watching through whatever ethereal mechanism the constellations used to observe the scenarios playing out below, something very old and very powerful had apparently decided that Kim Dokja, the reader, the nobody, the one character who shouldn't have existed at all, was the most interesting thing it had seen in a very long time. That was the moment Dokja stopped being afraid of the scenarios. He started being afraid of what came after. The constellations wanted a story. They always did. And Dokja had spent too long reading other people's stories to not recognize when he'd become the protagonist of his own. The question was whether that was something he'd chosen, or something that had chosen him. Chapters 7 and 8 of Omniscient Reader's Viewpoint don't answer that question. They just make it louder. They strip away the safety of foreknowledge and replace it with something more dangerous. The creeping realization that knowing the plot doesn't mean you can survive it. Not when you've already changed too much. Not when the story is no longer the one you read. Kim Dokja knows how this novel ends. He just doesn't know how his version ends yet. And for the first time since the apocalypse started, that scares him more than anything the constellations could throw at them.